In the UK, there were a group of gentlemen called bodgers. And bodgers went into wooded areas and bought small tracts of trees, set up temporary camps within that tract of trees, and carried tools with them to create the spindles and slatting for Windsor-type chairs and wooden chairs. And they would cut down the trees and fell them, split them out. They would quarter them, cut them to length to make chair legs and spindles and things like that. And then they would use simple tools that they could carry with them, living in the woods, setting up some type of shanty while they processed all the wood in that area. And it was said that a good bodger could turn out 144 of these pieces per day, which equated in that time period to about 95 pence. We're going to talk a little bit about the relationship today between steel and wood. We're going to talk about making a project that is portable for us to take to a more permanent type camp or a longer term camp situation, or something that you can keep around the homestead or take to shows that will be small and portable, that will fulfill lots of woodworking needs. Stay with me. You know, I've been doing a pretty in-depth study of wood crafting and woodworking skills, from the simplest form all the way to the more advanced forms of joinery and things like that. And as I progress in my experimental archaeology, using old-time tools and things like that, I realized that there's a direct correlation or relation between the steel and the wood. And I think that's important for us to understand, because working wood from earliest times of European contact in the US, but for even much longer in areas of Europe, the development of that wood, or the transition of that wood from raw material into something usable, had a direct relationship with a steel tool or an iron tool, depending on the time period that you were talking about. And we've talked about the stump anvils and the hacking stock and the claves and things like that that were used definitely in the Appalachian areas to make different types of furnishings for the home, all the way up to making shovels, rakes, flatware, and all those types of things. And the tools for that were fairly simple along the frontier. And the tools for a bodger were fairly simple as well. He had very similar tools in that he would have some type of, obviously, a felling axe to drop the tree to begin with. He would have a series of wedges made of wood, probably, and a beetle to split the wood, using his large axe as well. He would have a draw knife for debarking and for shaving down pieces of wood in a shave horse, which he would use. He would have some type of a pole lathe to turn the legs on. He probably had some type of carving knife of some sort for fine finishing work. And then he would have had some type of saw for bucking the lumber, like a bucking type saw. So his tools were very simple. He had the axe, he had the knife, he had the saw. He probably had a draw knife, and possibly sometimes even a froe. And those same tools that were used in Europe by the bodgers that were making these spindles and chair parts for Windsor type chairs were the same type tools that were used all along the American frontier in the early days by the commoners to make the furnishings for their own home, all the way up to actually building the cabin itself, depending on the notching that they were using for the logs themselves. So it's very interesting to me to study that and understand that relationship. So I'm looking for something that I can build portably that maybe could support all of the different types of woodwork in a compact type carryable bin. So as I study these different types of woodworking and things like that, I look at the bodger as a very wide example, or a very good example of how I should strive to be portability wise, because they could carry everything they had with them and take their tools to the work site. They didn't take their wood back to a shop. They actually took their shop to the woods and lived there until they had exhausted the resource, building some type of a shanty or a temporary shelter, and then using the tools that they had. And their main larger tools would have been something like the shave horse, the pole lathe, and possibly a grinding stone for sharpening tools. And then they would have had those 4 or 5 tools that we talked about in their arsenal to help them affect their trade. Not dissimilar from the Appalachian Mountains, not dissimilar from the new western frontier of the Ohio Valley area in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So with that, I'm looking at different designs and ways that I can incorporate things. And I'd like to build something that I can not only do regular tasks of like Appalachian type chair making or bow making on a shave horse, but I'd also like to be able to use that as a saw bench to be able to saw things down and make more dimensionalized lumber. I'd like to be able to use it for some type of a joining bench so that I can actually plane that lumber and create those joining surfaces that are completely flat and level and completely smooth. I'd also like to be able to possibly incorporate a pole lathe into that as well. But for today, what I want to do is I want to try to build a modified design that I've come up with that will give me both a shave horse and a saw bench and possibly a joining type bench in one small package that could be taken with me if I have conveyance. And then I'm going to try to incorporate a pole lathe into that later on. So stay with me and we'll get started. Okay, so let's begin to discuss setting this up and putting it together. For the bench itself, I'm using 2x10 stock, which gives me something about 9 inches wide. Now, to make this portable, it needs to be fairly short. And to take advantage of everything I want to take advantage of, it also has to be fairly portable. So I want it to be light. I'd love to have this deck about 6 feet long, but I'm going to try to shorten that to 4. Now, I'm going to use legs basically of the same stock here, and to make a proper saw bench, you would want that lumber to be about knee high, and on me that's 18 inches. And the reason for that is most old-time saw benches were right at knee level, so you could put your knee on there to either hold the stock or steady things up as you sawed. Work the same way if you're using a stump, obviously. But I also need to give myself a little extra space on one end because I need to make a V cut in here for rip sawing, for cutting down the grain instead of cross cutting, to steady the workpiece in a standing position. And that will also work advantageous to me for other carving tasks as well. So I want to take advantage of that feature of an English or French type saw bench in this design. So I've backed myself up from the back 8 inches, and instead of putting this leg even with the end, I'm going to put it back here at about that 8-inch mark. And this will be where I'm going to cut that V out of for my saw bench for rip sawing. Now after I cut my two 18-inch legs off of this 2x10 8 foot, so I've got 4 foot here, two 18-inch legs here, and that left with this piece of scrap. I'm going to slice this right down the middle, and I'm going to use that here as a support here, like this. But I'll fancy it up just a little bit. I won't leave it just a square block. But the first thing I have to do is I have to rip this down. Okay, so I just took this piece and ripped it in half, cut 2 places there to make them match, and it's going to set here just to be a support. Okay, now the one thing I have to watch on this end is down in here is I'm going to have to make sure that this is not in any way going to interfere with this becoming a shave horse as well, and I don't think it will. I think it's going to be fine. So you'll have one leg there, you'll have one leg here like this and this when we're done, and that will give us the basis of our beginning bench. Alright, so now we've cut this wedge out of here, and again I just kind of eyeballed my angles. I measured in 2 inches from each side, went to my center line to get my angle. I'm not really trying to get too awful fancy. Like I said, I saw it in here, I've got a little bit to clean out right here, and then I'm going to kind of round this off here, and that'll give me that part of my saw bench for rip cuts. Okay, like I said, I'm using power tools to build this stuff with because I'm trying to get it done fairly quick, and I'm just kind of using what I've got here to work with. So I'm going to make these 2 pieces up even, get them so that they match up really well with the glue line. I've got a screw started there. Get one in and go from there. Pull that down tight. Come to this other side and get it matched up. Good. There's a little crown in this wood right here, and I can take a plane to that later. I'm not worried about that right now. I put 4 screws in here to make sure it held, and I glued it, so the joint's going to be tight, no question about that. And once I flip it over and put this support leg in here, it'll be good and tight. Now I could just bring these lines down here that I used to pre-drill, and I'll know where to line this up in here. And I can do the same thing on the back side to get this exactly where I need it. So we'll go ahead and put 1 screw in this side real quick with it lined up. Then we'll come over and line our other side up and do the same thing. Then we'll get our middle screws. Okay, so the next thing I did was I came in here and I drilled 2 3/4 inch holes in the top of the bench, and I did them fairly close to this back end. And I say the back end because this is the sitting end of the bench if I'm working on other apparatuses that this bench will also have. But this is the rip cutting area of the bench and also the sawing area of the bench right now. So I just put 2 holes in here for now that were evenly spaced just to make sure that I could use it for a hold fast. And this is the hold fast that we forged in that video a couple weeks ago. You bang that in, and that holds your workpiece steady. If you have 2 of them, here's a store-bought one here. It's a little bit shorter, but it'll still work. Now I've got that piece held steady and it can't go anywhere while I'm sawing on it.